so I want to show you some pretty awesome dads who, and there's all kinds of these videos, but this one is one of my favorite, where their kids are acting out math class, and the dads have made a video surrounding that. So if you'll turn your eyes to the screen, this will be a light start to our morning.
I think it's already starting. Okay, here's your homework. First let me tell you the directions. What's 4 take away 5?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Take away. What's 6 take away 1?
1.
No, you take away, so you take away 1 out of 6. How much does it equal? What's 10 minus 1?
I don't know.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
6.
6, 7, 8, 9,
10.
Nope. Take away 1. How much is this?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Nope. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And one more. And add 1 more. How many does it equal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1.
It makes 9. See how you take away? You take away 1 and it equals
1.
Do you get it now?
Yes.
So it's fun being a dad. We're going to look at Ephesians 6 today on Father's Day for a couple reasons. One, Ephesians starts off with this heavy theology stuff. Now, I don't know how you feel about it or not, but it's kind of heavy as Paul is talking and educating us, the church, about things like atonement and the cross and grace and even the Trinity, which are pretty big stuff. That's the first part of Ephesians. But when you get to the last part, which is the part we're going to look at today, Paul shows us how all that heavy stuff is supposed to affect and work out in our day-to-day practical lives and week to week. And two of the things is what we're going to talk about today. Two of the areas I believe as a father are most on the minds of dads throughout the days and the weeks are things about their work and things about their family. And of course there's other things. I mean, hobbies should probably up there, with a high degree. But nonetheless, most dads' minds are filled constantly throughout any given week with thoughts about work and about their family. And so I want to take us to a part of Ephesians 6 which talk about our work and our family. And this is not just applicable for fathers, this is applicable for any human being there is. But on Father's Day, it felt important to at least zero in on these. So if you have a Bible, you can open to Ephesians 6. If not, we'll have it on the screen. We're going to start talking about how big things like God's grace and Jesus Christ are supposed to affect the ways we think about, the ways we feel about, and certainly the ways we conduct ourselves, starting with our work. So, in verse 5, let me read that to you. Paul starts by saying, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ." Now, I don't know how you feel when I read that, but almost every time I read that in the Bible, something inside of me cringes just a bit. And I don't like it when the Bible is talking about slavery and doesn't say after that, and by the way, slavery's awful. So I don't know if you've ever had this thought or this feeling like me. This isn't the main part of what I want to say, but it's certainly where I feel like I need to stop because I think enough people read the Bible and it comes up. Why are Christians okay with slavery in the Bible? It happens all the time. Why is that? Well, after doing a large amount of research on what it was like 2,000 years ago and even beyond that, it's clear to see, for the most part, certainly throughout the New Testament anyway, slavery was never based on race, and it was never lifetime. Now, when you get out of Egypt, I mean, it's a whole different story there. I'm just talking about the New Testament idea of slavery in that part of the world 2,000 years ago. Slavery had nothing to do with race, and it had nothing to do with a lifetime imprisonment. In fact, most slaves were let go by the time they were 30, so they could go live their lives. It's a very different concept than what I think of when I think of the slavery in this country in the 18th, a little bit, and 19th and 20th centuries. It's really different. In fact, some people back in biblical times chose to sell themselves into slavery for that part of their teens and their 20s for job security because it was hard to find. And so they voluntarily sold themselves into slavery. If they had a debt they couldn't pay, it was certainly better than going to jail, and that was a whole nother reason people chose to do that. It's a much different concept than what we deal with today. And there's no literary record of people identifying themselves as an abused and oppressed group called slaves. It didn't exist. So it's important when we talk about those kind of things in the Bible, I think at least to bring up once in a while and remind ourselves, maybe just remind me, that what we are talking about in Ephesians 6 is nothing like we have seen done in our country. Okay? So I just wanted to start there. It's not the point I want to make. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page as Paul addresses this group. And in verse 6, he goes on to say, obey them, not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. The fact that Paul even mentions slaves and doesn't just mention them, he addresses them as a dignified group of people. That didn't happen in any kind of literature. The Bible is very unique in this regard, where you have one of the authors, the main author of the New Testament, arguably, saying to slaves, slaves, conduct yourselves in this manner. Nobody ever addressed slaves like that because they weren't responsible individuals. They didn't have their independence. They couldn't choose to do what they wanted when they wanted. So no one even addressed them as dignified human beings. But the Bible does. And the Bible says, through Paul, conduct yourselves in this way, not as their slaves, but as slaves of Christ. I love that Paul treats them like people. And he says, you are doing the will of God. And when I read that in Ephesians 6, verse 6, it makes me realize we don't really have a biblical view of work, a functional biblical view of work. It's very rare. If I were to say to you, talking with Faith Harrison not long ago, she voiced the fact that she believes she is called to serve the Lord. If I told you that, what would immediately come to your mind that she's thinking about doing? Going into the mission field, right? Maybe going to church work of some kind. That's what wouldn't that naturally be what come to your mind? Now you can even say yes. Yes, that's what comes to our mind. That's good. Okay. And that's evidence of we don't have a biblical view of work because that's not biblical. I'm not saying those things aren't serving the Lord, but the Bible is super clear here, especially in Ephesians 6, that serving the Lord is not just reserved for professional ministry jobs, whether it's church work or mission work. That is not what serving the Lord is. In fact, when you look at Psalm, I'm going to show you two verses out of the Psalms. starting in Psalms 145, that educate me and us to have a biblical idea and view of work. And I think this is important whether we're on Father's Day or not. But in Psalm 145, verse 15, the author writes, "The eyes of all look to you, God, and you give them their food at the proper time." That's not talking about manna raining down from heaven. I mean, God has done that before. But how does God choose for human beings to get meals and food? He doesn't rain the food down. He can snap his fingers and everybody have a plate of food in front of them at any given moment, but that's not how he chooses to make sure nourishment is provided to human beings. How does he do it? He delegates that through the work of farmers and those working in processing, and those working in distribution, and those working in sales, and those working in retail. That's how he chooses to do it, through the work of hundreds and thousands of other people. That's how he's chosen it. And then in Psalm 147, verse 13, the author, speaking of God again, says, "He strengthens the bars of your gates and blesses your people within you." How does God choose to strengthen the bars of the gates of a city? Does he just do a little woo and some magic heavenly, I don't know, alloy comes in the bar? That's not how it works. The way that God has chosen to keep people safe and in order in their cities is through police officers, through lawmakers, through judges, through lawyers, through the work of other people. That's how God does it. So when the author says, God is giving you food, God is strengthening your gates, what the author means each of those times is God is choosing to use the work of other men and women to do these kind of things. Therefore, there is no such thing as sacred work and secular work. There's just work. The way that God has chosen to meet the needs of human beings on the planet is through the work of other human beings. So when he is talking to slaves, don't you ever think your job, your work is so menial, so meaningless, so unimportant that others are off serving the Lord and you're just doing this. You're just changing the oil. No, you are not. You are doing, according to the Bible, you are doing the work of God himself. He is using you to meet the needs of other people. That's supposed to be encouraging. That's highly encouraging to me. I didn't become a pastor because I thought being a math teacher and a coach wasn't the Lord's work, and this was. I just felt uniquely called to eat that kind of sandwich. That's it. That's what I chose to do. There's lots of sandwiches to eat, and according to the Bible, they're all God's sandwiches. I have no idea what that analogy means, but it sounded good in my head. And then verse 7 and 8, continuing to talk about work before we get to family. Paul says, serve wholeheartedly, as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. And I wanted to just remind you probably that wholeheartedly does not just mean give your maximum effort. I mean, it does mean that, but wholeheartedly means something far bigger than that. It means do it with a smile. Do it with joy. Do it with gladness. Working wholeheartedly is not just 110%, which is math that we just saw in the video. It's doing it joyfully. Now, here's why I bring that up. Most people decide to work wholeheartedly, either with maximum effort or even with a smile, depending upon their work environment, their work circumstances, the fringe benefits, or even the quality of their boss. That's what determines if they work wholeheartedly. I ran into this not that long ago, just this past winter when I was volunteer coaching at the Hereford Wellness Center. And things got out of hand in this little first grade basketball game quick, and this little kid was getting pummeled and beat up, not on purpose, but this gigantic first grader was taking advantage of this little first grader. I mean, and this kid was going to go home with bruises from his ears to his toenails. And I finally stood up and said to the officials, whoa, okay, you guys got to get this under control. I mean, otherwise this kid is going to go home terrified to ever play this game again. And I don't care who wins at all. I just don't want this child to go home terrified for his life. So just get control of the game. And the ref said, well, what do you want us to do? I said, I can come up with 5 things right off the top of my head, but that's not my job. That's your job. Do something. How about that? Anything would be better than what you are doing. I said it a little nicer, but probably not much. And then I'll never forget the comment I got from this employee. He said, look, I only get paid $10 an hour to do this. And I said, well, that's $10 more than I'm getting. So since I'm just doing this volunteer, should I just be watching television as the kids are playing? And what he was describing is, look, I would try harder if the work environment was different, if I was being compensated more. That's and I'm not knocking that guy, that's a normal thought from the way people are. That's not the biblical view of work. Because whether you are slave or free, Paul says, do it wholeheartedly. Meaning, look above and beyond your work environment. Look above and beyond your earthly bosses. Look to the one who created work. That boss always deserves maximum joyful effort. Yes? So look beyond this one. Look beyond what's going on here. I don't care if you're being paid $10 an hour or $100 an hour. That's got nothing to do with your wholehearted work. Therefore, every Christ follower should be utterly motivated to strive for excellence in absolutely everything they do, whether they're getting paid to do it or they're volunteering to do it. And I love the fact that I get to serve in a church and watching especially our kids' workers, our children's workers, doing this. They work at it wholeheartedly. If you've never seen Vel Simpson in action with our young children, you should. And it's not just her. We have lots of great children's workers. Mindy Warlick, Jody Jordan, Howard and Linda Perry. Phenomenal. They're working hard at it. Not because their environment's that great, and not because their boss is that good. It's because they're looking above us to the Creator that created it. He always deserves a really good effort, and a happy one at that. So, I want to time out. This is not an excuse if you're a boss. Like, look, I can just employ Christians and expect them to work their fingers to the bone gladly because, well, they should be looking to the other boss, not to me. So I can be a bump on a pickle and they can just do what they're supposed to do. No, this applies to you too. So if you are a boss, work hard to provide a terrific work environment, an awesome compensation that's beyond fair, it's generous, and be a kind of boss that's approachable, that listens, that actually cares about the well-being of your employees. You do that, and they'll be looking above you, whether you do that well that day or not, or that week or not, to their heavenly boss. So not only is all work sacred, it's all to be done with maximum joy for really good reasons. That's just about our work. Now let's talk about our family. Let's back up to the first part of Ephesians 6 in verse 1. This one's addressed to the children. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise. Now, something I noticed right at the beginning of this where it says, children, obey your parents, it assumes something that we should not assume. Because in that culture, it was very rare, but not in the biblical communities. Children, obey your parents implies the fact that mom and dad are both involved in raising the child. Dad isn't just off earning a living, providing food and shelter and opportunities. That's not what the dad was supposed to do only. The dad is also supposed to be highly involved and engaged in the lives and the personalities of the child. So much so that they're offering things that require obedience. So, dads, as one, if you ever come out of the gate with the argument, look, I don't care if you like me, children. My job is just to provide for you. That's part of it, but it's not all of it. Not biblically speaking. I mean, you can make up any idea you want. But biblically speaking, you're supposed to be involved in the lives of your kids. So much so that they have an opportunity to obey you or not. And then it says to honor your father and mother. And this applies whether we're talking about young children or adult children. How do you honor your father and mother? Here's the simplest application I can think of. You do what makes them feel respected. But the only way you figure that out is you got to talk to them. Do you know what makes your parents feel respected? Now, if there's a 4-year-old in this room, I would love for you to for you to have that conversation, and I would love to listen in on what happens and how they apply that. Because what makes me feel respected is not the same stuff that makes my wife feel respected. And that's just us. And it doesn't work across the board for mothers or fathers. All fathers feel respected a bit differently. So if you're interested in respecting your father today, or a father, do you know what would make them feel that way? And I don't know how you find out that information without a conversation of some sort. You can guess, but wouldn't you love your message? Because I believe most people I meet want to honor their mother and father, but I also believe they are guessing on what that is and hoping that that's the message that comes across. And after talking to other fathers and mothers, it doesn't come across all that often. Not because the intent isn't there. There's just not a communication. And it's really weird to be on the other end of it as the father and go, you know what would make me feel respected on Father's Day? That's a weird conversation. No one's that goofy in having that. So as the children, where it says children, obey and honor, ask them. I would love to honor you. What could I do or not do that would make you feel respected? And then let's get to the last verse I'll talk about today is verse 4. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Exasperate's a word I don't use, and B, I don't even know what it meant. So I had to look it up. Exasperating means to make them perpetually angry. And I didn't know what perpetually meant either, so I had to look that one up. So here's the best definition of exasperate I can come up with. Don't make them consistently have a current of anger in their life. That doesn't mean you're not going to make them mad. You're going to make them mad. But don't create a current of anger that's always inside of them. How do you do that? How do you not do that is probably a better question. What kind of things from fathers make children have a consistent current of anger inside of them? I can think of a couple from working with young people for decades and talking with them, and what makes them become and stay perpetually, if I'm even using that right, angry. One is excessive discipline, where there are tons of harsh demands There is an abundance of criticism. There's humiliation. There's a not good enough mentality, I guess. That's the part everyone, I think, kind of thinks of. Don't do that. Don't be that kind of dad. But what was surprising about the data in my conversations, there's another type of thing that also creates a current of anger, and that is under-disciplining. Being hands-off and just saying, look, my job is just to love them and let them figure life out. I mean, if they have a question, I will do my best to answer it. But otherwise, look, you go make your decisions, and I'll be here when you need me occasionally. And from talking to hundreds of adult children who have a fractured relationship with their father, that's as much part of the equation as the other side of excessive discipline, is under-involvement and under-discipline. And Ephesians 6 makes this pretty clear. Don't create a current of anger in your kids. Rather, bring them up. Which means get involved. You as the parent, in teamwork with the mother, Lord willing, are to show the children what you believe is right and wrong, wise and foolish, noble and selfish, and how you came up with that. You show them that. You talk about it and you demonstrate it by your actions. And then as the kid grows up, they may go, I think Dad was only about 62% right. I'll agree with 62% of that. Those kids have an incredible relationship with their parents, specifically their father, because their father treated them like an intelligent human being, one, by bringing them up, showing them, communicating, this is what I think, not just being an example, but attaching words to the example to make sure there would be zero communication gap between the two. Here's what I do, son or daughter, because I believe it's right and not wrong. I believe it's wise and not foolish. I believe it's noble and not selfish. Here's why I believe those things. I'd advise you doing the same. Giving them that foundation. That's how you bring them up, and that goes a long, long way for not exasperating a child. And then they may go, yeah, you're off your rocker, Dad. But at least they have a foundation and weren't left alone. Being left alone is what makes them have a current of anger in their life. So now the final question is, how do you, as children, how do you honor your parents without just being utterly compliant and seeking their approval too much? As parents, how do you train up your children in the way they should go without over-controlling them and without under-controlling them? How do you do that? Here's the only answer I have, and here's what I wrote down. I must know that Jesus lost the love of his Father so that I could have it forever. I must know that. And I'm not talking agree with it. A lot of you agree with that. That's not knowing. Knowing means it affects your thoughts, it affects your feelings, it affects your decisions, it affects your values, it affects the way you interpret everything and do everything. That's knowing. Do you know that Jesus lost the love that he willingly, and according to Hebrews 12, gladly lost the love of his Father so that you and I could enjoy it forever? Do you know that? Because only then will you have the security, if you know that, to not over-control your kids or under-control them. Only then, as children, will you be able to be free not to seek the approval of your parents too much or too little. It starts with seeing the ultimate master who gave his life so that slaves could be made free. Seeing the ultimate son who lost the love of his father so that orphans could become family. That's what it requires. Because that's the gospel. And when you know that, it changes everything, because the gospel changes everything. So the way I want to end today on Father's Day is, do you know it?